Have you ever witnessed a moment so charged with tension you could feel it in the air? A moment where power and principle collide at 35,000 feet. This is the story of a transatlantic flight from New York to London. A flight that should have been routine. But on this day, in the exclusive quiet of the first-class cabin, a confrontation erupted. A woman, dripping in wealth and entitlement, was denied her seat. 6 minutes later, through a single furious phone call, she had the flight attendant fired. But the story doesn't end there. In a twist of fate that feels torn from a Hollywood script, the powerful CEO was about to learn that the consequences of her actions were flying in the very same cabin with her, and the price for her arrogance wouldn't just be a ruined flight, it would be the ruin of her entire empire. The air in the jet bridge connected to Global Horizon Airlines Flight 110 was thick with the signature scent of possibility and recycled air. It was a Monday morning at John F. Kennedy International Airport, and the daily pilgrimage from New York to London was about to begin. For Amelia Hayes, a senior flight attendant with 12 years of dedicated service, this was a familiar rhythm. She stood at the aircraft door, her uniform immaculate, a welcoming smile fixed on her face that was both genuine and professionally mandated. Her eyes, however, held the sharp, discerning gaze of someone who had seen it all from nervous first-time flyers to seasoned business titans. Boarding was proceeding smoothly. The hushed reverence of the first-class cabin was gradually being filled by the quiet rustle of expensive coats being stowed and the soft clicks of luggage latches. Amelia greeted each passenger by name, a small touch she prided herself on. "Mr. Henderson, welcome aboard. 3A is just to your right. Mrs. Chen, a pleasure to see you again." Then Catherine Davenport arrived. She didn't so much walk down the jet bridge as she did command it. Dressed in a sharply tailored blazer that cost more than a month's rent for Amelia's apartment, with a leather briefcase clutched in one hand and a phone pressed to her ear. She bypassed the small queue of remaining passengers with an air of practiced indifference. "No, I don't care what Alistair's preliminary offer is. It's an insult," she said into her phone, her voice a low, cutting murmur. She stopped in front of Amelia, not acknowledging her, and gestured vaguely at the cabin. "Stow this for me, will you?" she said, thrusting her carry-on towards a junior attendant, Chloe, without making eye contact. Amelia stepped forward. "Welcome aboard, ma'am. May I see your boarding pass?" Catherine Davenport ended her call with an irritated sigh and held up her phone displaying a digital pass. Amelia scanned it with her handheld device. A soft, discordant beep sounded. Amelia frowned slightly and scanned it again. The same result. "I'm sorry, Miss Davenport," Amelia said, her tone calm and even. "There seems to be an issue. My system shows you are ticketed for seat 15B in premium economy." Catherine's head snapped up. Her eyes, the color of cold steel, narrowed. "That's absurd. I am in 2A. My assistant booked it weeks ago. Look again." "I have, ma'am," Amelia replied, holding up her device. "The manifest is quite clear. Perhaps there was a last-minute change, or an issue with the booking agency. Seat 2A is assigned to Mr. Albright, who has already boarded." She gestured discreetly towards a gentleman in the indicated seat, already engrossed in a newspaper. "I don't care what your little machine says," Catherine hissed, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that drew the attention of nearby passengers. "I am Catherine Davenport, CEO of Davenport Holdings. We have a corporate account with this airline that spends millions a year. I fly this route twice a month, and I always sit in first class. This is my seat. Now tell that man to move." Amelia felt a familiar knot tighten in her stomach. This was the moment, the pivot point where a flight could descend into chaos. But her training and her nature were rooted in procedure. Procedure was fair. Procedure was the firewall against anarchy. "Ma'am, I cannot displace another passenger who has a valid ticket for their assigned seat." Amelia explained, her voice remaining placid, a stark contrast to the brewing storm in front of her. "What I can do is check with the gate agent to see if there was a system error. If there are any no-shows in first class after the doors close, I would be happy to move you to an available seat." "No-shows the doors close. I don't have time for this amateur hour nonsense." Catherine scoffed. The color was rising in her cheeks. "Do you have any idea how important my meeting in London is? Your procedure is about to cost my company billions. Now, are you going to fix this, or do I need to speak to someone with a modicum of authority?" Captain Robert Miller. A veteran with a calming presence had been alerted by the purser and appeared from the cockpit. "Is there a problem here, ladies?" Catherine turned her glare on him. "This attendant is refusing to honor my first-class ticket and is jeopardizing my business." Captain Miller looked at Amelia, a silent question in his eyes. "Captain," Amelia said respectfully, "Ms. Davenport's pass is scanning for premium economy. Seat 2A is occupied by the correctly ticketed passenger. I've offered to investigate with the gate and accommodate her if a seat in first becomes available." The captain nodded, recognizing Amelia's professionalism. He turned to Catherine. "Ma'am, my flight attendant is following protocol. We have to trust the system we have. We will do everything we can to sort this out, but I cannot ask another passenger to move." Catherine Davenport looked from the captain's reasonable face to Amelia's resolute one and seemed to make a decision. A chillingly calm smile spread across her lips. "Protocol. I see." She took a step back, pulling out her phone. Her thumb moved with practiced speed. She dialed a number from her contacts labeled simply Frank. "Frank, it's Catherine," she said, her voice now deceptively sweet. "I'm on flight 110 at JFK. Yes, about to depart. I've encountered a rather unhelpful employee." She paused, her eyes locking onto Amelia's name badge. "Her name is Amelia Hayes." "Yes, Hayes. She's refusing to seat me in my ticketed first-class seat due to a supposed system error she's unwilling to override." A collective silent gasp seemed to ripple through the cabin. Passengers were now openly staring, their pre-flight reading forgotten. "I need you to handle it," Catherine continued, turning her back slightly as if discussing a trivial matter of catering. "No, I don't want a report. I want a solution. My solution is that I don't ever want to see this woman on a Global Horizon aircraft again. Is that understood?" Another pause. Amelia's heart hammered against her ribs, but her expression remained a mask of professionalism. Chloe, the junior attendant, looked pale and horrified. "Excellent," Catherine said. "Consider her employment terminated, effective immediately. Have security meet her at the gate." She hung up. The entire exchange had taken less than 90 seconds. She turned back to Amelia, her smile now one of pure, unadulterated triumph. "It seems protocol is about to change," Catherine said coolly. "Frank Peterson, your executive VP of operations, sends his regrets." Captain Miller's jaw tightened. "Ms. Davenport, you can't be serious." Just then the captain's own phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and his face went grim. It was a message from airline operations. The command was terse and unequivocal. "Stand down. Remove A. Hayes from flight crew. Await replacement. Security. En route to gate." The total time from Catherine Davenport's arrival at the aircraft door to the confirmation of Amelia's dismissal was just under 6 minutes. Amelia felt the floor drop out from beneath her. 12 years of service, of perfect records, of handling emergencies, both medical and mechanical, with grace, all erased in 6 minutes because she had refused to break the rules for one powerful woman. "Amelia," Captain Miller said, his voice heavy with a mixture of anger and helplessness. I'm so sorry." Amelia simply nodded, the shock rendering her speechless. She turned her movements stiff and walked towards the galley to retrieve her personal bag, the sympathetic and horrified eyes of her crew and the first-class passengers following her every step. As she passed seat 2A, the man who rightfully occupied it looked up from his paper with an expression of profound disgust. Catherine Davenport, meanwhile, gestured to the now vacant space near the front. "Now," she said to the stunned purser, "about that seat." With Mr. Albright in 2A, she would have to wait. But she didn't care. She had won. The message was sent. She was Catherine Davenport, and the world bent to her will. She was completely oblivious to the quiet man sitting in seat 4D, a man who had watched the entire scene without expression, his gaze missing nothing. The walk back up the jet bridge was the longest of Amelia Hayes's life. Each step felt both heavy and disconnected, as if she were watching herself from a distance. The same polished floor she had confidently walked down just an hour ago now seemed like a path of public humiliation. At the gate, 2 airport security officers and a grim-faced gate supervisor were waiting. They weren't aggressive, merely official, which somehow made it worse. "Amelia Hayes," one of them asked, though it wasn't really a question. "Yes," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. "We're here to escort you," the supervisor said, his tone lacking any accusation but filled with a corporate emptiness that chilled her to the bone. "Please come with us." They led her through the bustling terminal, a strange procession of 1 disgraced flight attendant and 3 stony-faced officials. People stared, their curiosity piqued by the security escort. Amelia kept her eyes fixed on the floor, the bright, cheerful advertisements for tropical vacations and luxury watches mocking her. Her career, her livelihood, the very thing that paid for her younger brother's mounting medical bills, had just been extinguished in the time it took to boil an egg. In a sterile, windowless office behind the check-in counters, she was handed a box to pack the contents of her locker. It was a swift, brutally efficient process. No one made eye contact for more than a second. They took her ID badge, the plastic rectangle that had been a part of her identity for over a decade. The finality of it was a physical blow. The gate supervisor mumbled something about HR contacting her regarding her final paycheck and severance, if any. Severance. For being fired on the spot at the whim of a passenger. The absurdity of it was staggering. Back on Flight 110, the atmosphere was thick with a toxic blend of shock and resentment. Chloe, the junior attendant, was fighting back tears as she performed her final safety checks. The purser, a man named David, moved with a rigid anger. He had been forced to ask a passenger in premium economy if he would voluntarily move to a middle seat in the main cabin to free up seat 15B for Catherine Davenport, who now sat there radiating smug satisfaction. A no-show had eventually cleared a seat in first class, and Catherine was moved to 3D just before the doors closed, a glass of champagne already in her hand. She made another call, this time to her office. "It's handled," she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "A minor annoyance. I'll be in London by 7 p.m., their time. Make sure the car is waiting. The meeting with Thorne is at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Everything hinges on this." She sipped her champagne, the cold fizz a perfect match for her mood. This deal with Thorn Industries was the culmination of her entire year. Her father's company, Davenport Holdings, was teetering on the edge of a hostile takeover by their ruthless competitor, Alistair Finch. Finch had been buying up stock swaying board members and poisoning their reputation in the market. This partnership with Marcus Thorn, the brilliant and notoriously reclusive head of Thorn Industries, was her only lifeline. It was an infusion of capital and innovation that would not only save the company, but catapult it into the future. That's why she had been so relentless. That's why the flight, the seat, the timing, it all mattered. A flight attendant's rigid adherence to rules was a trivial obstacle in the face of such high stakes. The woman Amelia was a casualty of war, nothing more. Catherine felt a gaze on her and looked up. Across the aisle in seat 4A was the man who had been in 2A, the one she'd tried to have displaced. He was looking at her not with anger, but with a quiet, penetrating contempt that unnerved her for a fraction of a second before her arrogance reasserted itself. She gave him a dismissive little smile and turned to look out the window as the plane finally pushed back from the gate. What she failed to notice, however, was the other man, the man in seat 4D on the same row as her critic. He was unassuming, dressed in a simple, well-made but unflashy charcoal sweater and jeans. He had sandy brown hair and wore glasses, and he was reading a thick, dog-eared paperback novel. He had a stillness about him that made him almost invisible in a cabin full of assertive personalities. He had observed the entire ugly scene with Amelia. He had seen Catherine's imperious arrival, her escalating anger, her chilling phone call. He had watched as a good woman was professionally executed for doing her job correctly. He had noted the triumphant gleam in Catherine's eye as she took her seat. He had also seen the manifest earlier, when he checked in. He knew his own name was on it. Marcus Thorn closed his book, but he didn't see the words. His mind was replaying the last 10 minutes. He was a man who had built an emir from nothing, based on a simple principle: character is capital. You could judge a person's entire business ethos by how they treated those they perceived to be beneath them. It was a better indicator than any balance sheet or market projection. He was flying to London for the most important meeting of his year, a potential partnership with Davenport Holdings. He had been intrigued by its CEO, Catherine Davenport, known for her sharp mind and aggressive business tactics. He had agreed to the meeting to see if that aggression was tempered by vision and integrity. He adjusted his glasses and glanced over at the woman in seat 3D, now idly flipping through the in-flight magazine. He had his answer. The meeting tomorrow morning wasn't to decide if he would do business with her. The meeting was now to inform her face-to-face precisely why he would not. The irony was bitter. In her furious rush to get to him, Catherine Davenport had ensured she would never reach her goal. She had fired a flight attendant to secure a seat, and in doing so, she had just fired her own last hope. The ascent of Flight 110 was smooth, a powerful and steady climb through the clouds into the brilliant, unending blue of the upper atmosphere. Below, the sprawling coastline of America receded, and the vast, dark expanse of the Atlantic Ocean began. Inside the first-class cabin, the dinner service commenced. The clinking of cutlery against porcelain and the low murmur of conversation created a cocoon of manufactured tranquility. Catherine Davenport was in her element. She savored the seared scallops paired with a crisp Sancerre and began to review her files on a tablet. The face of Marcus Thorn, taken from a grainy business journal photo, stared back at her. He was an enigma in the corporate world. While CEOs like her courted the spotlight, Thorne shunned it. He gave no interviews, attended no galas. His company, Thorne Industries, was a behemoth in sustainable technology and logistics, and it was famously almost fanatically ethical in its practices. His employees were known for their fierce loyalty, and his business partners for their long-standing relationships. He was, in short, the exact opposite of Alistair Finch, the corporate raider currently circling Davenport Holdings. Finch was all slash-and-burn asset stripping for short-term gain. Thorne built things to last. The deal was simple. Davenport Holdings had the global distribution network Thorne needed, and Thorne Industries had the cash and proprietary technology that would make Davenport Holdings takeover-proof. It was a perfect synergy, a lifeline she had to grasp. Her presentation was flawless. The numbers were solid, the projections ambitious but achievable. All she had to do was convince the man himself. She felt a surge of confidence. The unpleasantness with the flight attendant was already fading, a trivial footnote. It was necessary. Anyone in her position would have done the same. Power wasn't about being liked, it was about being effective. As the attendants cleared the dinner plates, a thought struck her. It was a networking trick she'd used before. "Excuse me," she said to David the purser, who approached her with a carefully neutral expression. "Yes, Miss Davenport. I was just wondering, could you perhaps let me have a look at the passenger manifest for first class? I thought I saw a familiar face when I boarded, and I can't for the life of me place him. It would be terribly embarrassing to run into him in London and not remember." It was a flimsy pretext, but delivered with enough authority it usually worked. David hesitated. "Ma'am, for privacy reasons, I'm not supposed to share the full manifest." Catherine's eyes hardened for a split second. "Of course privacy is paramount. I'm not asking for addresses or phone numbers, just the names. I'm certain Frank Peterson would have no issue with it." The veiled threat hung in the air. David's shoulders slumped in defeat. He disappeared for a moment and returned with a tablet holding it, so only she could see the screen. "Just the names, ma'am." She scanned the list. Albright, Chen, Henderson. Her eyes moved down the column, and then they stopped. They widened, and she felt a jolt, a sudden sickening lurch, as if the plane had hit a pocket of severe turbulence. There on the screen was the name Thorne Marcus. Seat 4D. Her blood ran cold. 4D. It couldn't be. She snapped her head up, her gaze darting across the cabin. She looked at the unassuming man with the charcoal sweater and the paperback novel. The man who had been sitting there quietly the entire time. The man who had witnessed her entire performance. The man whose grainy photo was on her own tablet. It was him. It was unmistakably him. He wasn't some titan of industry surrounded by aides. He wasn't in the front row. He was just a man, sitting in 4D reading a book. And he had seen everything. A wave of nausea washed over her. The carefully constructed confidence she had felt moments before shattered into a million pieces. The confrontation at the door wasn't a trivial footnote anymore. It was the entire story. She hadn't just been rude to a flight attendant in front of a few anonymous businessmen. She had revealed her true character to the one person in the world she needed to impress. She looked at him again. This time he was looking back. His expression wasn't angry or smug. It was something far worse, calm, analytical, and deeply, profoundly disappointed. It was the look of a man who had already made his decision. In that single silent exchange across the hushed cabin, Catherine Davenport understood that her desperate 9-hour flight to save her company had been doomed before it ever left the ground. The very seat she had caused a woman to be fired over was just a few feet from the man who held her entire future in his hands, and she had single-handedly destroyed it all. The Sancerre in her stomach turned to acid. The rest of the flight stretched before her, not as a journey of hope, but as a long, slow fall from grace. For the next hour, Catherine sat frozen in her seat. The luxurious cabin felt like a sepulchre quay. The low hum of the engines was a funeral dirge for her company. Every scenario she ran through her head ended in disaster. She could pretend she didn't know who he was, but that was impossible. She could try to apologize, but how could she? "I'm sorry for being a monstrous person. Please disregard that and give me billions of dollars." It was ludicrous, but doing nothing was to accept defeat, and Catherine Davenport was not a woman who accepted defeat. She was a fighter. She had to try. She had to salvage something from the wreckage. Taking a deep, steadying breath, she unbuckled her seatbelt. She smoothed her blazer, composed her features into a mask of professional warmth, and walked the few steps across the aisle to his seat. Marcus Thorne looked up from his book as she approached. He didn't seem surprised. He simply placed a bookmark between the pages and closed it, giving her his full attention. "Mr. Thorne," she began, her voice a model of poised courtesy. "Catherine Davenport, I know we have a meeting scheduled for tomorrow, but I was so surprised to see you on board. I hope you're having a pleasant flight." "Ms. Davenport," he replied, his voice even and quiet. He didn't stand or offer to shake her hand. "It's been an informative flight." The word hung in the air between them, informative. It was a perfectly neutral word, yet it carried the weight of a judge's gavel. I wanted to speak to you about what happened before takeoff," she stammered, the practiced smoothness deserting her. "It was an incredibly stressful situation. There was a mix-up with my booking, and the future of my company is riding on my meeting in London. I'm afraid I allowed the pressure to get the better of me. It was an aberration, and I am truly sorry if my directness caused any discomfort." She tried to frame it as a moment of high-stakes pressure, a leader making a tough call. She was hoping he, as a fellow CEO, might understand. Marcus listened patiently, his hands resting on his closed book. When she finished, there was a long silence. He wasn't looking at her with judgment anymore, but with a kind of academic curiosity. "An aberration," he repeated softly. "You see, Ms. Davenport, I don't believe it was. I believe what I saw was the truth. It's easy for people to be charming and professional when they're speaking to someone they perceive as an equal or a superior. The real test of character, the only test that matters to me, is how you behave when you have power over someone. How you treat the waitress, the janitor, the flight attendant who is just trying to do her job according to the rules." Catherine's face paled. This wasn't going the way she had planned. That woman, Amelia Hayes, he continued, showed more grace and professionalism under extreme duress than I have seen in most corporate boardrooms. She was firm, polite, and correct. She followed the rules that are in place to ensure fairness and safety. In return for her competence, you had her summarily dismissed. You used your immense power not to solve a problem, but to crush a person you saw as an obstacle. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping but gaining intensity. My company, Ms. Davenport, is built on people like her. People of integrity, who do the right thing, even when it's difficult. We are a community, built on mutual respect. The idea of partnering Davenport Holdings with Thorne Industries was predicated on the belief that your leadership, while aggressive, was fundamentally sound. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. What I learned today is that your leadership is built on a foundation of contempt. You believe rules are for other people. You believe status entitles you to cruelty. How could I ever trust you with my company's resources, with my employees' futures, knowing that you would treat them as disposable the moment they became inconvenient? Catherine opened her mouth to argue to defend herself, but no words came out. He was dissecting her not with anger, but with calm, irrefutable logic. He was holding up a mirror, and the reflection was hideous. "Our meeting for tomorrow is cancelled." Marcus Thorne said, his voice now gentle, as if delivering a final, sad verdict. "I cannot in good conscience enter into a partnership with you. I wish you luck with Alistair Finch. You may need it." He opened his book again, returning to his page. It was a clear, unequivocal dismissal. There was no appeal. Catherine stood there for a moment, swaying with the slight motion of the plane completely exposed. The other passengers in the cabin pretended not to watch, but she could feel their eyes on her. She had never felt so small, so utterly powerless. She retreated to her seat, her body moving on autopilot. She buckled herself in and stared blankly at the seat back in front of her. She hadn't just lost a deal. She had lost her company. She had lost her father's legacy. Alistair Finch would now pick the bones of Davenport Holdings clean. And it was all because of her. Her arrogance, her temper, her belief in her own untouchable power had led her directly to this moment of absolute ruin, trapped in a metal tube, flying towards a future that had just been erased. The landing at Heathrow Airport was as smooth as the takeoff had been, but for Catherine Davenport, it felt like a final jarring crash. The moment the wheels touched the tarmac, her phone, which she'd switched on prematurely, began to vibrate uncontrollably. It was a torrent of messages and missed calls from her board members and her chief financial officer. She answered the call from her CFO, a man named George. His voice was frantic. "Catherine, where have you been? It's a bloodbath. Finch moved this morning. He got Henderson from the board to flip. He has the votes. He's called an emergency meeting for tomorrow to vote you out and accept his final offer. We needed the Thorne deal. It was our only defense. I know George." Catherine said, her voice hollow. The life had been drained from it. "What do you mean, you know? Did you speak to Thorne? Did you close it? The deal is dead." "George," she said, watching out the window as the drab grey landscape of London's outskirts sped by. "It's over." She didn't offer an explanation. She couldn't. How could she say that it was all lost, not in a boardroom, but in the first 5 minutes of a flight? As the plane taxied to the gate, Marcus Thorne stood up, gathered his simple carry-on bag, and deplaned without so much as a backward glance in her direction. He disappeared into the flow of London, a ghost who had sealed her fate. The news of the impending takeover of Davenport Holdings hit the financial wires within hours. By the next morning, it was the lead story in the Wall Street Journal. The narrative spun by Alistair Finch's camp was one of a legacy company crippled by its arrogant and out-of-touch CEO. An anonymous source, likely the board member who had flipped, had even leaked a tidbit about an incident of gross misconduct on a flight that showed her instability. Her public execution was as swift and brutal as the one she had dealt Amelia Hayes. Within a week, she was formally removed as CEO of the company her grandfather had founded. Meanwhile, 1,500 miles away in a different city, Amelia Hayes was navigating her own landing. She had returned to her modest apartment in Queens in a state of shock, the box of her personal effects feeling like a coffin for her career. The first day was a blur of fear and despair. How would she pay her rent? How would she afford the experimental treatment her brother Michael needed for his chronic illness? But the story of her firing had not happened in a vacuum. On a plane full of first-class passengers, many of them influential, the tale began to spread. It rippled through pilot and crew lounges, a cautionary tale of the new corporate ruthlessness at Global Horizon. An internal blog post by a sympathetic crew member detailing Amelia's professionalism and Catherine's shocking behavior went viral within the company and was soon leaked to airline industry news sites. The story was framed as a battle between steadfast employee integrity and unchecked customer entitlement. The name Amelia Hayes became a symbol of quiet dignity. 3 days after her dismissal, Amelia received an email. The subject line read, "An admirer from Orion Air." Cautiously, she opened it. It was from the vice president of in-flight services at Orion Air, a premium airline famous for its innovative culture and for consistently being voted one of the best places to work. The email was direct. The VP had read about the incident on Flight 110. He wrote that while he was appalled by her treatment, he was deeply impressed by her conduct. At Orion, the email read, "We believe our crew is our greatest asset. We empower them to make the right decisions, not just the easy ones. Your commitment to procedure and grace under fire is exactly the quality we look for, not just in our flight attendants, but in our leaders." The email concluded with an offer for her to fly to their headquarters in Chicago, all expenses paid, to discuss a potential role. It wasn't just to be a flight attendant. They were interested in talking to her about a position in their training academy, developing curriculum on de-escalation service protocol and assertive professionalism. Amelia stared at the screen, tears welling in her eyes. Not of despair this time, but of overwhelming relief and disbelief. She had been fired for upholding the standards of her profession, and now she was being offered a chance to teach those very standards at one of the most respected airlines in the world. A week later, Amelia was in a boardroom in Chicago. It was sleek and modern, but the atmosphere was one of warmth and respect. They didn't just offer her the job, they celebrated her. They saw her as a hero, not a victim. The offered salary was nearly double what she had been making at Global Horizon, and the benefits package included comprehensive health insurance that would cover all of her brother's treatments without question. She accepted on the spot. As she signed the contract, she felt a profound sense of realignment in the universe. Her lowest moment had impossibly become the foundation for a new, better life. She had been cast out only to be lifted higher than she had ever been before. Her horizon was no longer limited to the narrow aisle of an aircraft. It was now as wide and promising as the sky itself. 9 months passed. The seasons turned, and the world moved on as it always does. In a state-of-the-art training facility near O'Hare, Amelia Hayes stood before a class of bright-eyed new Orion Air recruits. She was no longer just Amelia, the flight attendant. She was Ms. Hayes, the head of onboard conflict resolution and service excellence. She moved with a newfound confidence, her voice clear and steady as she shared the very real-world scenarios they might face. "Your most important job," she told them, "is not serving champagne. It's maintaining a standard. The rules of this aircraft are a promise of safety and fairness to every single person on board, from the passenger in 1A to the one in 42B. Upholding that promise, especially when it's hard, is the core of your integrity. Never let anyone, no matter how powerful they seem, force you to break it." After her class, she checked her phone. There was a message from her brother Michael. It was a photo of him standing on a hiking trail, smiling, the picture of health. His new treatment, fully covered by her insurance, was working miracles. First hike in 3 years. Thank you, big sis. You saved me." Amelia smiled a deep, genuine smile of peace and gratitude. Her firing had been a bitter pill, but it had ultimately been the cure for all her anxieties. On that same afternoon, a woman sat in the crowded, noisy departure lounge of Terminal 7 at JFK. She was flying to a small city in the Midwest for a job interview, a mid-level logistics management position. She wore a simple blouse and slacks that were neat but nondescript. Her hair was cut in a practical, unstyled bob. She was anonymous, a face in the crowd, one of the thousands of travelers hustling through the airport. No one gave her a second glance. No one would ever guess that this woman, Catherine Davenport, had once commanded a multi-billion-dollar empire from a penthouse office overlooking Central Park. After the takeover, her fall had been swift and total. Her name was now synonymous with corporate failure. Her reputation was so toxic that no major company would touch her. Her personal fortune, much of which had been tied up in company stock, had evaporated. She had been forced to sell her penthouse, her car, her expensive wardrobe. All the trappings of power were gone, and what was left was a hollowed-out woman haunted by a single 6-minute decision. A group of flight attendants walked past, their laughter bright and their uniforms the distinctive stylish purple of Orion Air sharp. Catherine watched them, a pang of something unidentifiable, envy, regret, bitterness twisting in her gut. Then her eyes caught a digital display screen on the wall. It was cycling through advertisements and airport information. Suddenly, it changed to an Orion Air employee spotlight. The screen filled with the warm, smiling face of a woman with kind, professional eyes. Below the photo, the text read, "Meet Amelia Hayes, our head of service excellence, integrity in the air, leadership on the ground." Catherine froze her coffee cup halfway to her lips. It was her, the flight attendant, looking poised, successful and happy. It was like being struck by lightning. The woman whose life she had tried to ruin for the sake of a chair had not been ruined at all. She had flourished. She had been rewarded for the very thing Catherine had punished her for. As if to compound the moment, 2 men in suits sat down in the seats next to her, deep in conversation. "Total implosion," one of them said. "Davenport Holdings was a legacy, and she just flew it right into the ground. Did you hear that story about what triggered the final collapse? Apparently she had some kind of epic meltdown on a flight to London, got a flight attendant fired right on the spot. The guy she was supposed to be meeting to save the company was on the same flight and saw the whole thing. Killed the deal right there." The other man whistled. "Wow. Talk about shooting yourself in the foot. Some people, their arrogance is just a ticking time bomb." Catherine stood up abruptly, her hands trembling. She couldn't breathe. She walked to the window overlooking the tarmac, a vast and busy world of takeoffs and landings, of journeys beginning and ending. She had once looked at this view from the exclusive quiet of a first-class lounge, seeing it as her kingdom. Now she saw it from the other side of the glass, a nobody. She wasn't just broke. She wasn't just unemployed. She was a ghost haunted by the memory of her own power, invisible to the world she once ruled. The real consequence of her actions wasn't the loss of her money or her job. It was the crushing, permanent weight of her own insignificance. She had tried to make one person small, and in the end, the only person she had managed to erase was herself. The hum of the fluorescent lights was the loudest sound in the office. It was a monotonous, soul-draining drone that had replaced the symphony of a bustling Manhattan office Catherine had once known. 9 months after her spectacular fall, she was Catherine Davenport no more. She was Kathy D., a mid-level logistics coordinator for Midwest Freight Solutions, a respectable but utterly unremarkable company housed in a glass and concrete box in a sprawling Ohio office park. Her world had shrunk from global markets and transatlantic flights to tracking numbers and bills of lading. Her power suits had been replaced by sensible blouses from a department store. Her authority, once absolute, was now confined to a cubicle and a Dell computer. Her new boss, a kind but no-nonsense man named Dave Norton, valued punctuality and accuracy above all else. He had no idea who she used to be. He had hired her based on a heavily edited resume that highlighted her logistical management experience and omitted the CEO title. For the first time in her adult life, she was judged not on her name but on her work. It was both terrifying and, in a strange way, purifying. She was good at the job. The same sharp intellect that had managed $1 billion portfolio was more than capable of optimizing freight routes. She learned the regulations, the carrier contracts, the myriad details that kept goods moving across the country. She kept her head down, spoke only when necessary, and ate lunch alone at her desk. She was rebuilding not an empire, but a life one spreadsheet at a time. The test came on a Tuesday afternoon. A wave of panic radiated from the sales department. The source was their biggest client, Titan, manufacturing a corporate behemoth that accounted for nearly 30% of Midwest Freight's annual revenue. Dave Norton hurried over to her cubicle, his face etched with worry. "Kathy, I need you on this. Titan is screaming. They have a priority shipment of components, 3 full trucks, en route to their Texas plant. They just found out their assembly line there went down. They want us to divert the entire shipment, effective immediately, to their facility in Nevada." Catherine pulled up the route data. "The trucks are already in Arkansas, Dave. Diverting to Nevada isn't a simple detour. It crosses different state lines, requires new permits for the cargo type, and violates the hours of service regulations for the drivers. They'd have to drive for 16 straight hours to make Titan's new deadline. It's not just against our policy. It's illegal." "I know that," Dave said, running a hand through his thinning hair. "But it's Alan Shepard on the phone. He's the VP of Operations at Titan. He says if we can't do it, he'll find a carrier who can, and he'll be taking his entire account with him. He said, and I quote, 'I don't pay you to tell me about rules. I pay you to get results.'" The phrase hit Catherine like a physical blow. It was the same sentiment, the same worldview she had once embodied. "I don't care about your procedure. Fix it." She felt a cold dread creep up her spine. For a moment, the old Catherine flickered to life. The predator, the problem solver. She could do it. She knew the loopholes. She knew how to apply pressure, how to threaten a small carrier company with the loss of Midwest's business if they didn't bend the rules for their drivers. She could bully and cajole and make this happen. She could be the hero who saved the Titan account. But then another image flooded her mind. The cool, disappointed eyes of Marcus Thorne, the quiet dignity of Amelia Hayes, the memory of her own reflection in the airport window, a ghost, an anonymous failure. She thought of the 3 truck drivers, men with families and lives being forced to drive, fatigued on dark highways, all to satisfy the whim of a powerful man in a distant office. They were the Amelia Hayeses of this scenario, and she was being asked to be Catherine Davenport again. Taking a slow, deliberate breath, she looked at Dave. "Put him on speaker, Dave. I'll handle it." Dave looked hesitant, but patched the call through to her phone. "Alan, you've got Kathy D. on the line from our logistics team," he said nervously. "Kathy D," the voice boomed, dripping with impatience. "Are my trucks on their way to Nevada or not?" "Good afternoon, Mr. Shepard." Catherine began, her voice calm, and measured a stark contrast to the frantic pounding of her heart. "I have your route information right here. I understand you need to divert the shipment. Unfortunately, an immediate direct rerouting to meet your requested arrival time isn't possible." "Not possible," Shepard scoffed. "That's not an answer I accept." "It's not an opinion, sir. It's a matter of federal law." Catherine continued, her voice gaining strength. She was no longer channeling her old self, but the quiet authority of the flight attendant she had wronged. The driver's hours of service are legally mandated to prevent accidents caused by fatigue. Forcing them to exceed those hours would not only endanger them and others on the road, but it would also place both of our companies in a position of extreme legal and financial liability should an incident occur. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "What I can do," Catherine went on. "Shifting from roadblock to solution provider is two things. Option 1. We can reroute the shipment via a legal route which will involve a mandatory 10-hour rest stop for the drivers. The cargo would arrive in Nevada approximately 12 hours later than you requested, but it would be safe and fully compliant. Option 2. I can immediately begin sourcing a fresh team of drivers from a partner hub in Little Rock to take over the cargo. This would be more expensive, but it would get your shipment to Nevada only 4 hours behind your original schedule. Both options ensure the integrity of your cargo and the safety of everyone involved." She laid it out not as a negotiation, but as a statement of professional fact. She wasn't asking for permission. She was presenting the only viable ethical paths forward. Shepard was quiet for a long moment. Catherine could almost hear the gears turning in his head, his rage being slowly replaced by grudging respect for her thoroughness. "Send me the cost breakdown for the driver swap," he said finally. His tone clipped but devoid of its earlier aggression. "And get it moving." He hung up. Dave Norton stared at Catherine, his mouth slightly agape. I can't believe that worked," he breathed. "He was ready to burn us to the ground. You didn't even flinch." He clapped her on the shoulder. "Great work, Kathy. Really. You handled that like a true professional." For the first time in almost a year, Catherine felt a flicker of genuine pride. It wasn't the intoxicating rush of a billion-dollar merger, but a quiet, solid satisfaction. She hadn't bent the world to her will. She had navigated it with integrity, and she had been praised for it. A month later, her new reality took another ironic turn. Dave assigned her to an on-site consultation with a new client in Denver. "You'll fly out Monday morning," he'd said, handing her the itinerary. "Orion Air, seat 24B. The irony was not lost on her. Of course it was Orion Air. The universe, it seemed, had a wicked sense of humor. As she stood in the boarding line at the Columbus airport, she felt a familiar anxiety. She was just another face in the crowd, shuffling along in the economy line, her simple rolling bag in tow. She found her middle seat and squeezed past her seatmates, the small humiliations of economy travel, the lack of legroom, the proximity to strangers feeling sharp and foreign. As she settled in, the flight attendants began their final preparations. The lead attendant, wearing a supervisor's insignia on her uniform, walked down the aisle, her eyes scanning the cabin with practiced efficiency. Catherine looked up and her breath caught in her throat. It was Amelia Hayes. She looked different, yet exactly the same. The uniform was sharper, the authority in her posture more pronounced, but the calm, professional eyes were identical. She looked strong, happy, and utterly in her element. For a terrifying second, their eyes met. Catherine saw a flicker of recognition, not of a monster, not of a rival, but of a face seen long ago. She braced herself for anything. A sneer, a triumphant smirk, a pointed call for a supervisor, a public shaming. She deserved it all. But Amelia did none of those things. Her expression remained neutral. She gave Catherine a brief, impersonal, professional nod, the exact same polite acknowledgement she gave the passenger in 24A and 24C. Then she turned her attention to a junior attendant, offering a quiet word of encouragement before moving on. The moment passed. To Amelia Hayes, Catherine Davenport was nothing. Not an enemy to be vanquished or a villain to be shamed. She was simply a passenger. Another soul in a metal tube owed the same promise of safety and fairness as everyone else. She was irrelevant. The sheer weightless neutrality of it was more devastating than any confrontation could have been. It was the final verdict. Her power, her rage, her very identity had made such a cataclysmic impact on her own life, and yet on the person who was the catalyst, she had left no scar. Amelia had moved on and moved up, while Catherine was a footnote in a story that was no longer about her. As the plane climbed into the sky, Catherine looked out the small, thick window at the receding earth. The crushing weight of her failure, the bitterness of her anonymity, finally began to lift. It was replaced by a startling, quiet clarity. She had lost everything she thought she was, and here in the middle seat of an economy cabin, under the indifferent care of the woman she had wronged, she was finally free to become someone else. The journey wouldn't be grand or powerful. It would be small and quiet, and for the first time, it would be honest. That is the story of Catherine Davenport and Amelia Hayes, a story that unfolded not in a boardroom, but in the pressurized cabin of a transatlantic flight, where a 6-minute decision triggered a lifetime of consequences. It's a stark reminder that true power isn't measured by your title or your bank account, but by your character, especially when no one important seems to be watching. Integrity, it turns out, is a currency that can't be bought. Catherine's arrogance cost her an empire, while Amelia's steadfast professionalism, the very thing that got her fired, became the foundation for a better life. The world has a strange and often beautiful way of balancing its own books. If this story of poetic justice and the incredible resilience of the human spirit resonated with you, please take a moment to hit that like button and share it with someone who might appreciate it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true stories, where actions big and small lead to powerful and life-altering consequences. Thank you for listening.